that we will be visiting. And without any further ado, if you would please give a very warm welcome to Captain Richard Heyman.
Thank you, Jan, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to be on this beautiful ship with all of you, and it's good to see those who are on the last leg of our journey from Hong Kong, and you didn't jump ship for another sampan, so good to see everybody. And I look forward to meeting as many of you as possible. I'm here throughout this cruise back to Singapore, and I am here with my sister who has joined me. That's my sister Boo over there. In case you wonder, she's not my wife, so my mother reminds me. And my wife, unfortunately, has this terrible thing called work that she couldn't come on this cruise. So we're going to tough it out together with you all on this journey into the Indian Ocean, essentially, the Straits of Malacca and out into the Indian Ocean and back to Indonesia. I know many of you have already been to this part of the world many times and have come on this trip particularly because we're going to some unusual places that normally you could not even get to other than on a ship. And so we will, as usual in Asia, be surprised by things we thought we knew and then find many things that we have never seen before. I'm going to talk about just our immediate ports that we're going to up the Straits of Malacca here. And I assure you that the towns will all be washed off by the time we get there by this bit of a rain. But it is the dry season, no matter how wet you get on deck. And this is the good time of year to be here. So we've been coming up already from Singapore. Did everybody have a good time in Singapore? It was, yes, and well, for how brief time we had there. But that great city is then matched by a few others that we'll go to. Kuala Lumpur, capital of Malaysia. Then, of course, we're going up to Penang right here, then Langkawi, and then Phuket, and then off into the Indian Ocean. Now, this is a remarkable big peninsula. Because it sort of extends like the tail of Southeast Asia down here. This is the Isthmus of Kra that has been often proposed to put in a canal, a ship canal. Like the Panama Canal, it would save so much sailing and steaming time, but for some reason Singapore would not like it to be there because this passage around Singapore, as you saw, is the world's greatest harbor for especially layover of great ships because the waters are calm, there's never a typhoon, the food is delicious, and the town is a sailor's delight of shopping. But the Straits of Malacca are quite dramatic because there's some narrows. Once you got out of the roads of Singapore, came up here, there's a lot of narrow passages, and I put my own sea chart for the Straits of Malacca back by the door on the right up here. So if you want to look at how navigation threads its way through this area, it's a challenge. We still have a pilot on board, but the world's shipping is getting so big that now some of the big tankers cannot get through here. They go through the Straits of Sunda instead because of the difficulty of this area. And I'll talk about that a bit more as we come back to Singapore. But today I'm going to show you a bit about Penang. Now here's an old chart of this area, early, actually an Italian chart. When the Europeans first came here, they were quite astounded by the amount of sailing and commercial traffic that came through here. And Singapore was originally a trading post, predated any Europeans. Malacca, right there, was the first Portuguese settlement in 1508 by Alfonso de Albuquerque, after which my hometown of Albuquerque, New Mexico, was named. But Magellan was an aide to Albuquerque, came to Malacca, and therefore he felt he could safely come back the other way around the world to get to the Spice Islands south of here. Then the Dutch came, and then the British came, and then everybody else has been passing through the Straits of Malacca ever since, making it one of the world's busiest waterways. You can see all the traffic just now coming and going. It is about half of the world's oil passes through this passage now to feed East Asia, and so it's very strategic, but an international open waterway, even though it's very close to Indonesian and Malaysian shore. And then Phuket is up there. Now these islands had been, of course, under Malay, Indian, Chinese influence for thousands of years, and the European overlay is just a brief period in the last 500 years, and now it's a shared culture in all of these places we're going. So First, I'll just show you, this is Penang, which has as its symbol the jackfruit tree, which is sort of like the big breadfruit you'll see growing on some of the trees. And it is one of the many provinces and islands of Malaysia. Malaysia being a federation of the traditional sultanates, and there are still sultans in various of the provinces, and then a few of the areas are their own self-administrating district. Penang was a traditional trading island off the shore and is a special place because it has a very, as you can see from this satellite view, it has a high mountain in the center, some forests, reefs and beaches around it, but it has a trading town that's been called Georgetown ever since it was a British colony since the early 1800s, and then it has developed into a large commercial center for this region. It has now a bridge that crosses from Butterworth and the Malaysian shore and into the town and the various sites around there, but it's now quite a busy place. It's grown tremendously in the last number of decades. It had been originally a British coaling station for steamships that came down, and then it was also a Navy base to protect the Straits of Malacca until Malaysia became an independent country in 1954. But we will be sailing in right to Georgetown, and then there are tours around the island and different sites, and I'll just show you a bit more of it. It used to be a very sleepy, slow motion kind of a village like most of this coast until it developed into the modern industrial age. And now as we approach from sea, it looks like this. So there's a token skyscraper and a lot of business district, and then the old forts around the front and Waterfront Park. It used to be you had to get over there by ferry boat from the mainland, and they still run to other farther ports not connected by what is now the Great Bridge that was built in 1985, that then this causeway connected Georgetown and Penang to the mainland, and that allowed it to grow to the state that it has grown now. So here's the center of Georgetown, which is has a population of about 150,000 people. So it's a small city, but it's very well packed right around the old harbor. And we will be coming in right at the dock over there, the Swindon dock, and land here, and then the old town is right in the center. The bigger shopping, the Kumtar Towers, that big one you can see there. And then there's all these different sites in the city, especially it is a city that is packed with temples. Now here's a view just coming into the dock with the old signal flag. And then there's Fort Cornwallis, which was the compound, the British fort that protected the harbor, and it still stands as a historic monument overlooking the harbor. Here's the great clock tower in the center, one of the rotundas. This is all within walking distance right off of the ship. If you take your leisure that way or come back on a tour, you'll see this tower. And in the center of the town there are the British-built Anglican church, and then other offices, buildings, and some of the old mansions are right downtown and are now preserved. Unlike some of the other cities of Asia, let's say the colonial legacy has been fairly well preserved in Georgetown and in Penang. There was never the sort of wanton destruction of the colonial era that is typical of some cities, especially like Hong Kong. Well, then maybe a better history is told in the cemeteries. Here's one in the Anglican cemetery, but anybody know that language that's on that? Well, if you can tell me, I'll buy you a free drink after lunch. How's that? No, I think it's actually a form of Urdu, but I'm not sure. Here's the Jewish cemetery. So Penang always had a variety of traders from all of the Indian Ocean and Asia coming by. So it's had Islamic, Jewish, Chinese, Indian, European, everybody has come to Penang. Not that it became a very large center like Singapore, but it was always very multicultural, ethnic place. And then, of course, it had its troubles in the wars, not just going out to fight elsewhere, but Malaysia in particular was taken by the Japanese. Then it had the death march to the railway, and the POWs would take up to build the bridge over the River Kwai, which is up north in Thailand to Burma. And then it had the Malayan emergency, which was the communist insurgency, the Indonesian confrontation when the Indonesians were threatening to take parts of Malaysia when the Federation was on its shakier grounds, and actually Singapore broke off from the Malaysian Federation. And then another reinsurgency period in Malaysia where there was guerrilla fighting in the mountains of the mainland, not so much in Penang, but this is the trouble of the past, but it's all now a very peaceful part of the world. So here's one of the old governor's mansions. So you see this sort of Victorian architecture throughout the town. And then the downtown commercial district had colonial era buildings and also shopkeep two stories arcaded walkways. So in the tropical heat and also in the rainy season, you could walk down the avenues without getting too wet. Most of that's still there, now converted to contemporary business purposes. So here's one of the local banks, and it says here, common element in the flags of Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand, and Indonesia are red stripes. I'm not sure what that implies. That may mean the bank is in the red? I don't know. I better go check my account there. Anyway, it's a very pleasant town to walk around, or if you want to take it easy, take one of the rickshaws. This is offered as a tour. It's a great little trip right around the downtown area without having to get on and off a bus or go walking in the tropical heat. It's somewhat of an obstacle course to try to get on the sidewalks because the arcades often have people eating in tables or they have goods out on the sidewalk. So if you're walking around this town, the motto is watch your step, but this is the easy way to go. And if you don't take the tour, you can just go out and hail one and they'll take you around. But it's a great trip around to see some of the sights. It's a very busy town and congested in its old quarters. Of course, it has a whole new section of condominiums and resorts outside of the central town, but the old markets are very, politely called pungent, because there's a lot of agricultural product that come in, a lot of cooking on the sidewalks, and so it's the true flavor of Asia, unlike what you'll see in some of the newly rebuilt Asian capitals. Penang has so many different peoples that it's sort of another great palette of all kinds of food, Malay, Chinese, Indian. This is the pleasure of coming into Southeast Asia. It isn't one ethnic group only, nor one cuisine. So here's a little bit of some of the shops that you can have. This one is serving a rojak and famous something or other. Maybe check on the menu tonight. We might have some, but probably not. Then they also have crafts like batik works, carvings, and these are traditional products in the city and out in the countryside. If you take that tour out to the north side of the island, it does go past some of the nutmeg, cashew farms. They have other features out where you can see the sort of the bountiful agriculture of this island. It does not have such deep forests. There's some preserves on the top of the mountain just for the water supply, but this is not quite as wild as we'll see in other places, particularly when we go over to the Indonesian side of Sumatra. But here's a typical restaurant, the Nyonya Baba, which in Chinese actually means the Longfeng, or the dragon phoenix cuisine, which is yin-yang and very healthy for you. But in the Malaysian blend, it's also very spicy, unlike a lot of Chinese food from South China. So if you have a chance to go out and have your noodles or try some of this, is one of the treats of Penang, because the food has a lot of variety. Most of it is out in greatest display in the evening. Unfortunately, we'll be sailing off, so you don't get the cool of the evening and the crowds that come out to the food streets that they have right downtown and along the waterfront. What we do have time to go see is all of the many temples, of which there's a great variety, and this is the Thai one, the Chaya Mangkalaram, which is typically ornate with glass and ceramic decorations on the high-pitched roofs. That's Naga and a Garuda guardian. And this one, they have a great reclining Buddha, and we'll see more of these as we go on our trip, because the Buddhist temples are, of course, the main religion in Thailand. Now, most of Malaysia is Muslim, but in Penang they have many Thai families because it was a trading post coming down from Phuket. But here's the napping Buddha, I always call him. He can barely keep his eyes awake after lunch. You don't notice that. And here's the standing Buddha in one of the temples, offering blessings and asking for a tip. I think that's what it was in the... No, I shouldn't say things like that. But here's another example right downtown, the Burmese Temple, which is even more elaborate and sort of is a blend of the Thai style with the Indian style. So you have that pyramidal ornamented decorative tower, which is typical of Burmese, and then again a big standing Buddha. Then there are the Chinese temples, of which there's probably the most in this town are Chinese and Buddhist again, or else they're Confucian and they are ancestral clan houses. So on one of the tours, I know they go up to the White Buddha Temple, which is the largest, up on the hill to the west of the downtown. And this is a monastery and a large temple grounds with many pavilions, and you walk up a hill to past ponds of turtles, and then you get up to these great overlooks of the hills and the city. And this is like a lot of contemporary Buddhism, still building and collecting and very busy with people coming in, making offerings. Unlike a church, it's open every day. People come at any time, and there are ceremonies, particularly to remember the deceased, and then Buddha's birthday. So there are festivals at these Buddhist temples. In the local style, people come and buy gold leaf, and then they press them onto the certain points of it. Here's a four-headed Buddha getting a gold facelift. And here's a little sign that I took when I was there last. Do not simply believe what you hear just because you have heard it for a long time. I will be brief then. But you can read. This is the unusual, let's say, ethics given out at this particular temple. Do not be fooled by outward appearances. And do not be convinced of anything out of respect and deference to your spiritual teachers. Well, you can think about that. They are building this temple even larger, so they just put up a very large Goddess of Mercy statue just a couple of years ago and put up this pavilion over it. So you can see, like the rest of Penang, it's become quite prosperous, and therefore a lot of people come and donate to all of these various temples. So they're all building, and it's sort of an example how the economy is then going into the religious competitions, and particularly in Penang. So the Buddhism is certainly the largest in this island, but here's one of the old Chinese clan houses. It's more traditional. This is South Chinese style, more Cantonese style, with this sort of elaborate tile work and mythology all over the roof. And then there are many mosques also. Now, again, most of Malaysia is Muslim, and probably the majority in Penang are Muslim, but they are generally the poorest of people in Malaysia are what they call the Bamaputri, who are the people of the earth, who were the traditional countryside people, mostly farmers. The cities, though, have a majority often of Chinese and other traders, so that there are mosques of different kinds. This one happens to be for the Indian Tamil who are in the city. And so you have a variety of Islam also. Here's a more traditional Malaysian mosque, and then there are ones that are from India, that are in Indian Tamil style or variations of it. So here's one that is a Hindu temple that is planning to be built. It isn't built yet, but that's the sort of traditional design that is probably built by the time a ship gets there. And here's another Devi temple that's in Penang, which has up into the mountain, and it's a site of devotion where you have the variety of Hindu gods that are then worshipped. I believe this is Krishna and Parvati. And here's just an example of the devotion to the hand of, I believe, Krishna in this case. So you'll see all over town there's a lot of offerings of flowers and sacred places in the midst of all of the traffic in the markets. So you'll see quite a kaleidoscope of spiritual life. One of the tours takes you go to this Penang, the mansion, the Penang mansion, which was one of the straight Chinese merchant families going back a couple of hundred years, and they built a beautiful mansion in a mixed architectural style, and that's now open as a museum. It's right downtown, and this has an open courtyard. The superstructure of it actually was made in Scotland, brought back, and then assembled, and then it was decorated with a whole variety of Chinese traditional interior, and then a collection of radios and a silk bed from France, and sort of a mixed bag of interior arts and design inside. It's quite a lovely house. And the family has their family still is in the area, though. Now the current generation is in business in Singapore, but they've preserved the house and then opened it to the public. But here's one of the great elders of the family. And look at this portrait of the great-grandmother. She doesn't seem to be too happy to have her portrait painted. This is traditional Chinese style, of course. And then there is, beside it, the family altar where they have the past generations on the altar, and then they are venerated on certain days, and the family has reunions in this part of the hall. Now, this is the sort of thing you don't see in mainland China because most of this was destroyed, but here it is better preserved in Penang. And they have the kitchens, and you can go through the whole house. This is an example how they kept the kids under from running away, perhaps, from the grandmother. So then there's another beautiful house that's the Kongsi house, and it means the, again, it was a merchant's house that's a blue mansion, and this is on the I know it's on the rickshaw tour, and other trips go there too, but this is a much larger and a more traditional Chinese-style house with beautiful ceramic works all through it, and an inner courtyard. And it was also used as the one of the sets for when Catherine Deneuve was in Indochine, if you've seen that film. Now, those are special mansions. Most of the city was what they call these shopkeep houses, where there'd be a two-story, one with family live upstairs, have a shop and a business downstairs. And so this was the way the whole city used to look. Much of it has been torn down now because these houses were lacking in plumbing and things that people want, so there's a whole new section of town. And a lot of the old neighborhoods have been falling apart. So a couple of years ago, I was there taking this picture, and these old houses were literally going to rack and ruin as they were building big malls. And of course, this is one of the transformations in Asia where the vernacular architecture is being lost, even though a few of the special mansions are being preserved. And so you can walk around this area that's sort of in off of the downtown area, and you too can invest and build one of these, restore that if you like. It's actually, UNESCO came in and tried to get the government to stop the demolition. So the ones in good shape will be, let's say, refitted with electricity and air conditioning, things people want, and not have it all lost to the, let's say, the mallification of Asia. And then if you take a walk just from the dock, you can go along the Waterfront Park, which is newly built. Now, this used to be a working waterfront with ships and boats and things. It was not a public park like it has become today. So in the heat of the day, you'll see a lot of people come walk along this now newly built waterfront park, and our ship will just be down at the end of this walkway if you want to go and see some of the local people in their daily activity. If you go on the tour outside of town, you can go up and see the butterfly park and the bird aviary, and there's a lot of things that are attractions for people to come to Penang, and then they have a series of beaches around outside of town. Here's the Ferengi Beach, which is beautiful white sand that faces to the north, and has a lush tropical environment. Now on this cruise, we're going to be seeing a lot of beaches, so you can become a beachologist by the end of it and compare each one, and a lot of them have some things like this, rocks, and others are very, like when we go to Langkawi, there's a lot of completely pristine mangrove and beaches, and so that's more of a nature reserve rather than the developed resorts of Penang, Phuket, and other places that you know of. But this area was also hit by the great tsunami back in December 2004, so it wasn't as damaged as Phuket or the western shore of Sumatra, where the center of the earthquake was, but they did lose a number of people on the shores of Penang, and this is the monument to the people who were lost. But then the resorts have been trying to draw people back, saying that the damage, which wasn't that much in Penang, has been repaired and it's safe. And they have, south of the city, quite a bit of sumptuous resorts. You'll see this town and Malaysia in general have become so prosperous that they're planning ever grander projects. Now, every time I go to Singapore, I'm always surprised what they built just since the last time I was there. But Penang, I don't know if they built this. This was planned a number of years ago, and so I found their renderings of the global city to make a business center and this kind of iconic architecture that is all of the rage all through Asia. And in this version of another development, they wanted to make green buildings so that rather than have just glass and steel, they would take the tropical vegetation and cover the buildings with it so that it would keep the buildings cool and also aerated and provide literally a green residence. And again, I don't think it's been built yet, but we'll see in the next couple of days. So that is Penang. It's a larger town than you could imagine it, but it also has its traditional charms and some surprising features. Then we're going to sail up the coast to Langkawi, which is not so far. It will be overnight. Then we'll be to this archipelago. Now this has over 99 major islands, and it's sort of a spray of tropical islands off the shore of Malaysia. It was famously a lair of pirates because small boats could go in there and hide, and even the British Navy couldn't get in there to roust them out. And now it's pacified. I'd say there's no more of that problem in this area, but it's a nature experience just to go in and go into the mangrove forests, go to some of the wildlife centers they built there. It is the natural world that we've all come here to see. And it doesn't have that much cultural interest. There's a small town, there's a mosque, and there's a small market. But this is where we'll see life as it has been for thousands of years on this side of the ocean, and this is being the Andaman Sea that we're going up into. I'll talk more about that as we go out into the sea after we've left Phuket. And if you have the opportunity to go snorkeling, for instance, this is one of the great diving areas of the world, up off Langkawi to Phuket and other places. So as we go up the coast, then we come into Thailand. Now, many of you are very familiar with Thailand. We just sailed from Bangkok all the way around. Now we're coming up the west coast of Thailand. And this, again, is facing the more turbulent ocean of the Indian Ocean, so it has, let's say, bigger seas than in the Gulf of Thailand. But we are coming right into this, let's say, the knee of the Malaysian peninsula. You note there is the railroad that comes all the way down from Bangkok and take the Orient Express down to Singapore over about 3 days. But most people will come in just to see all these little islands. Now there's Langkawi. Pulau means islands in Bahasa Malaysian. And then Ko means island in Thai. As is the nature of Southeast Asia, all these different neighboring countries have a different language, different script, and are not necessarily feeling neighborly to each other. So there's still some conflicts between Malaysia, Thailand, Burma over borders, but fortunately in this era everybody's at peace pretty much. But we're going to be sailing right up to Phuket. Now this has become a very famous resort area because it has many, many islands and scenic spots, and then beautiful resorts and Thai food and all the other pleasures of visiting Thailand. We will be docking here in Phuket town, but this is the great Phangna Bay, which is one of the great scenic wonders of the world. The town itself will be docking right about there, and then there's a short ride into the little town of Phuket. It's an old trading town, again, with shop houses. It was originally settled with some Portuguese, and then Chinese, and then Thai, so it's a mixed architectural heritage, sort of like Penang, but not a very big town. But mainly it has all of these other beaches, Patong, Karon, Katanoi, Nanham. That's where the Royal Yacht Club of the royalty of Thailand come and have their sailing off into the the Indian Ocean. And then there are villages on the inside protected from the larger sea, the sea gypsies. They're usually called Palau Laut, or the sea people of this area that would live on villages on stilts. They'd be offshore or else have shore villages, and they would fish in these rich waters. And there's, again, a couple of excursions to some of the elephant park and into the town itself. Some of the temples here. Again, now this is Thailand, so you know that this is a nation with a constitutional monarchy. So everywhere you're going to go, you're going to again see King Bhumipol. And the other great feature of Thailand is that it is Buddhist, of course, and very patriotic. This is the monument of the two sisters who defended Phuket from the invading Burmese in the 1720s. At the same time, they went and the Burmese invaded and sacked the ancient capital of Ayutthaya, about north of Bangkok. But you'll see everywhere in Thailand you have devotion for the king, and it was a very strong patriotic feeling because Thailand was always independent, was never colonized, unlike every other Asian nation. The other factor is that it's a very devoutly Buddhist nation. There's almost very, very few Muslims in all of Thailand, so that every young boy has to spend at least 3 months as a monk to learn humility, charity, and devotion. I'm thinking of sending my 2 teenage boys to Thailand, but they don't want that. They don't want that kind of vacation. I don't know why. So here's a couple of them that are sent to be monks on the beach. Now, that's not the usual desire of most tourists to pray on the beach, but you can try it. But one thing we'll do is we will go visit some of the great temples there. These are not quite as magnificent as you'll see in Bangkok, but there's quite a few around Phuket, as is the tradition of the people, with the gilded Buddhas and the temple guardians. This is the angel of the Asparagus. They're particularly featured in the dancing. The classical dancing will imitate have this kind of a conical decoration and beautiful dance motions. Here's the Garuda, or kind of the flying bird demon that protects the temple and is typical of Thai architecture. And then outside of Phuket, which is a growing town, has a lot of traffic, and it's like a lot of Thailand, become terribly congested. But nonetheless, because of the prosperity of the place, they just built another temple out on the main road going up to Phangna, and they have one of the world's biggest reclining Buddhas there, who is sort of caught up in the electrical wiring there. We didn't stop to go and see, but I caught a glimpse of him. You see, that's a very gigantic statue, but I don't know if we'll get to see it up close. Phuket, unfortunately, had on its western shore facing the Indian Ocean, the tsunami came in, was very destructive to the buildings and villages along that whole coast. Now, on the inside of the Phangna Bay, that was safe, but this took a very big hit when the sea went out and then came back in a great rush. And you all remember that tragedy of December 2004, when hundreds of thousands of people died in this whole region. So this is the memory of this terrible event, and you can see the water level that came into some of these towns and just washed it all away. And now much of it has been rebuilt. Here's an example of the shore communities that were then devastated. So that we hope this never happens again, but it is the toll of this region that whole vast lowlands were washed away, and all their people and all their villages. It was worse actually where we'll go in Sumatra. This was an island I visited many years ago called Kopipi. This is a picture of what it used to be like. And it is, it's just south of Phuket, and you have to take a local ferry to get down there, but it had this beautiful double crescent beach and mountains and caves all around it. And the tsunami came and washed the entire town away. So that's no longer there unless they've begun to rebuild it. But the great site in this area is Phangna Bay, which is a karst formations that have been flooded by the sea, similar to Halong Bay. Those of us aboard this last cruise went up off of North Vietnam into that great similar structure. And this is a kind of a mountain that is sedimentary with calcite domes that remained as the rest of their plane and underpinnings became eroded over time. The central stone is limestone, which is, of course, a porous and a easily eroded stone, but the calcite on the ridges makes this phenomenal seascape. And again, they have villages on these areas, mangrove swamps, and thousands of islands. And so if you come this far, this is what I recommend to go see, just because there's nothing like it in most of the places where we live. And only in Vietnam is there a similar site. Now this was named Phangna after a Indian princess was traveling from India to come to Southeast Asia when it was part of the larger trade routes and empire. And this princess on a boat drowned in the bay. And so they named it after her, and then she's become a fertility cult for the local people. So this is a cave near the mountains on the shore, which is dedicated to her, and then women come to pray there for pregnancy. And you might note there are these things that are then called lingams that are then decorated, but that's just part of the Hindu culture that is the background to this area, even though most people here are now Buddhist. So if you take this excursion on this kind of a wooden boat which will take maybe 20, 30 people. It is a full-day trip. Jasmine told you about it, you can read about it, but this is really the highlight of visiting Phuket, to go out into the mountains and then take a journey into the fantastic seascape, which has to be seen to be believed. Of course, this was also the setting for the James Bond movie, The Man with the Golden Gun, and remember the speedboat chases and the intrigue in that area. Nowadays, it's very placid and peaceful. There are many visitors, but it's such a vast area. Once you get out into here, you can just sort of pick your peak. And the last time I came here, we went actually kayaking, and you see this sort of the stalactite calcium that's coming down and collecting. There's a lot of caves and interiors to all of these hills, so that if you come up close, you can all about reach out and touch the mountain. And then if you dare and want to go out, you can go out in a kayak. You don't have to paddle it yourself. Every kayak has a local fellow who will help you do it so that you don't get tired, and you can just sort of enjoy the view. So we went out, and then you go out into the right tidal conditions. They'll go out and pick a cave and go into these mountains. And it is a sort of fantasy land of the geology, and trees and sort of jungle hanging on where they can. Also some very large monitor lizards hanging on the rocks. So this is a natural wonderland, certainly. And after you've come into the center of one of these islands, there's a mangrove forest in the center, which is sort of a lake within a sea, within a mountain, and then a forest in the center of it. So this is quite a remarkable place to come in and visit. And this kind of mangrove is typical. It'll grow in salt water, and it'll go very shallow into the roots, and it's a very important ecological feature of this area for production of fish and bird life and wildlife. And this Phangna Bay is one of the most beautiful examples of mangroves in addition to the mountains. So I hope you can appreciate this beautiful area we're going to go. I'll continue to show you some things we will do or things that we may not get to do, but I hope it makes your voyage into this region all the more interesting, and my pleasure to be with you on our journey into Inner Asia. Thank you very much, and I look forward to sailing with you.